The over $1 trillion beauty industry is booming and set to grow an estimated 7.3% in 2025. There are thousands of brands and millions of products. The sector is as crowded as it is competitive. But for the second largest player, with a market cap of about $26 billion, things aren't going as well. Este Lauder's stock tumbled nearly 50% in 2024, 42% in 2023, and 33% in 2022, altogether stripping more than $100 billion from its value.
Wow, that's pretty rough.
In just 3 years.
Este Lauder, this was a premium company whose time has come and gone.
I know that change is never easy, and we have a lot of work to do. We're embarking on the biggest operational transformation in our company's history.
In January 2025, it appointed new CEO Stéphane de la Faverie, and a month later, the company expanded and modified its restructuring plan from February 2024, which now includes laying off as many as 7,000 employees. So, can one of America's oldest and most beloved makeup companies make a comeback?
Today, the American beauty business is one of the largest consumer service industries in the country.
25.
So I've certainly heard of this brand. I'm definitely not that much into cosmetic products. I think that's probably pretty standard, I would guess, for my gender. Though obviously some people of my gender are into it regardless of other factors. So I'm sure some people are really familiar and up to date with what this brand has been doing and what's been going on with it, but I'm certainly not one of those people. So I'm definitely looking forward to see how they were able to lose so much of a market share over the span of 3 years.
$5 billion cosmetics giant Este Lauder was launched by New York City couple Este Lauder and Joseph Lauder in 1946. After focusing on the flagship brand for years, the company became known for its aggressive acquisition strategy in the 90s that included household names like La Mer in 1995, MAC in 1998, and Jo Malone in 1999. Today, the company owns more than 20 brands across 5 categories, sold in more than 150 countries.
Once they acquire a company...
Yeah, this definitely is not my expertise. I probably know like 10% of those names, maybe.
They are very good at scaling the brand globally. Jo Malone is a really good example of that. And they bought it when it was very small. I want to say it might have been as small as $50 million of annual revenue. And now it's one of their largest. It's in their top 5 brands.
But the company has slipped. Though its fiscal second quarter 2025 earnings announced on February 4th, 2025 beat expectations, its revenue was down 6% year over year due to falling sales and profits. Skincare, its largest category by far, was down 12%.
The top line decline, it's not good, and it's not down 40%. When you look at the company's performance excluding Asia and Asia travel retail, they're actually not doing that badly. Okay, they do have issues here and there. The big problem is their big exposure to Asia and travel retail.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. My first thought would have been, since it's such an old brand, maybe they aren't getting on the trends nowadays. I feel like most cosmetic products and things like that, I would assume you probably want to be on TikTok or something along those lines. I assume that's where most people who are really into this, the younger audiences, the younger probably female-dominated audiences, are likely looking at influencers. I think that's a huge part of where most people get their cosmetic and maybe even fashion advice from. But maybe I'm misinformed. If you know any better, I'm happy to learn. Please post your thoughts in the comments below. But that'd be my guess, is maybe they didn't hop on these trends. I would say, especially kind of being more of like a older brand, and I don't know if it's supposed to be particularly fancy. I only seemingly know little about this, but I'm pretty sure I know other brands that are cosmetic brands that are seemingly more famous and more luxurious. And so for me, I would have to assume that they're sort of like in this upper mid tier where they're maybe more expensive than the usual, but they're not really unattainable cosmetics that really show prestige or some type of uniqueness from them. So I would have to assume that you'd likely want to still market to the standard consumer in this case, which I would assume is on TikTok and other social media that are looking for influencers and what they're using And so that would have been my initial guess, but we'll see. They seem to be referencing sort of travel. I'm not really sure what that means in the cosmetic space, so maybe I'll learn something here.
All goes back to the 2010s, when Este Lauder began making substantial investments for its Asia market, like a $1 billion manufacturing facility in Japan in 2018, an innovation center in China, and a distribution facility in Switzerland supporting its duty-free business. And all this because it anticipated strong growth in China's premium beauty market.
So for many years, investors and everybody was applauding Estee Lauder. And companies like Coty today in the beauty industry wish they were bigger in China.
But that became a big weakness after the country's economy didn't recover from the pandemic as quickly as analysts expected.
I think that speaks right to the point of how important geographical diversification is for a global company like Estee, right? You know, macro backdrop continues to worsen. It takes time for you to find other large markets to kind of mitigate the impact.
Overall, global beauty spending has slowed since the pandemic. Though sales grew double digits in 2023 from 2022, it was mainly due to price increases. And that...
Wow, I probably wouldn't have guessed that myself. I think generally my expectation of how this works is folks who are spending the most money nowadays are the ones who are still kind of like YOLOing it after COVID. They still want to kind of show off on all the trips they're going on, all the fancy stuff they have. I know the market has been getting a little tighter here, so maybe folks are starting to run out of money to be able to keep pursuing this. But I would have guessed that the number of people who want to do this would have increased, not just an increase in margin due to pricing, that there's actually very little demand increase for cosmetics. So there must be another thing going on here. Maybe this is something where the pricing has just increased so much that because the market is tighter, people are choosing this as sort of like a luxury or a nice to have product. And so they're keeping their money for necessities like groceries and other standard bills that they would have. But that's definitely interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that that change is happening in the market right now.
That has partly affected Estee Lauder too. Its net earnings dropped by 60% in 2024 from 2023. The company cut its dividends by nearly half in its fiscal Q1.
Whoa, that's quite a difference. So they just showed $409 million from a little over $1 billion in 1 year. That's such a huge difference. This company is not doing well at all. Clearly, this is definitely impacting their stock market price, but any company who loses half of their revenue and their net earnings in 1 year is certainly in trouble. I'm sure their CEO is in trouble. Probably all of their leadership is in trouble. That's really tough. Very few companies drop that much so quickly.
Cut its dividends by nearly half in its fiscal Q1 2025, which meant it reduced the amount of money it would pay its shareholders, something companies rarely do. But in this case, helped the company conserve cash for its restructuring plan.
I think that was a prudent decision, especially now that we get to know more about the challenges that the company faced in Q2 and going forward in the next couple of quarters.
Its North America sales have slowed too, in part because of inflation and an overall drop in global spending.
That does seem like a prudent decision. Generally speaking, the reason why companies pay out dividends is because companies have basically gotten to a certain point in their life cycle where they believe growth is not really as attainable for them. So an example of this, I think Meta might be somebody who has switched over to dividends somewhat recently. So if you think of Meta back in the day, like when they were Facebook, they weren't really making any money. Their entire goal was to grow. And so they spent as much money as fast as they could in order to gain market share and a customer base. And so their belief at that time, and for a while after they became profitable, was for every dollar that they have, they would be better off investing it back into the company because the company would be more valuable overall. So what they mean by that is with this money that they have in their pocket, they can maybe grow the user base or something like that that might outpace competitors, for instance. And so therefore, the best interest of the investor, the shareholder, is for them to keep investing in their core business so they can keep growing. and then that stock would be worth more than it would be otherwise. The reason why companies sort of switch to a dividend payment is usually once you hit market saturation. So again, like Meta, once you get so big and once you're one of the biggest companies, there's not much more you can grow. And so this is usually the time that folks start to switch. Other classic brands, I think Coca-Cola is one of them, who also has dividend payments, where Coca-Cola is ubiquitous. Like I think pretty much every country has Coca-Cola there. It's in basically every convenience store around the world. And so it's not like you can just double the sales of Coca-Cola. It's already everywhere. People already know about it. And so there's not much more growth that they're going to have. So the best thing that they can do for their shareholders is to take the extra profits that they have and just give it to them. And that's basically the entire premise of dividends. And so go back to why this is a prudent choice for them, is that if they saw a lot of struggles in their business, if they kept paying out dividends, which would be the extra cash that they have on hand, then they would just continue to see themselves decline. So if they took them back and then started to invest in their company again, what they're saying is, now that money is worth more for us to increase the value of our shares again, which is probably true, especially if they drop like over 70% in value. Then likely at this point in time, being able to take $1 and invest it back into the core business will make their business more successful, increase their share price, and then maybe one day they'll go back to paying out dividends.
But also because some of its products have lost market share to rival brands, like L'Oreal, who grew La Roche-Posay into the fastest-growing skincare brand in 2022 and 2023. Other smaller brands have penetrated the market, while Este Lauder has been slower to adapt to new trends and invest in new markets and products.
Newness is a huge part of the beauty landscape and sector. You got brands like Rare Beauty, Makeup by Mario. You've got these brands that are connecting with consumers in new, innovative ways. They're fresh and new. They're growing like crazy. It's really difficult as an incumbent to hold your ground.
Stéphane de la Faverie took the reins as new president and CEO of Este Lauder at the start of 2025 after a turbulent few quarters. It was the first new CEO in 16 years. The company posted a series of videos outlining his plan to restore sustainable sales growth.
But as we look ahead, we must learn from what worked and what didn't. We must be bolder in our pivot to growth.
We all knew a shake.
Who are these videos for? I think it's nice that they have them, but like, were they just sharing it for their customers, for their investors, presumably? It's interesting that they chose to make a series of videos to say, yeah, we're going to do better as a company. Seems like you probably could have just invested that money into proper marketing for your products. But like I said earlier, I don't really know too much about cosmetics. So if that's what makes sense for them, I'll assume they know what they're doing.
We all knew a shakeup was coming and needed. So it's good to see that it's here. It's just a question of, of execution of the game plan and an ability to kind of start to then focus on growth again.
The first step is
learning that was the new CEO after like 16 years, and all these photos of him at like photo ops with people is, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little skeptical of him, but I'm a little bit more of the opinion that maybe this is more for like his own personal brand and awareness of him being the new leader of the company. And that's why he's doing all this marketing effort for it, as opposed to what's actually potentially beneficial to the company. But that's just my very off-the-cuff take of this individual, just after this very brief introduction to the company and him through this video.
And an ability to kind of start to then focus on growth again.
The first step is reducing the workforce, the biggest operational change in the company's history. That also includes trimming down the C-suite.
That makes sense. Step 1, make videos about yourself that you put out. Step 2, fire a lot of other people at the company.
As the company reevaluates its brand portfolio, it could sell some of its lower performing brands. Like in makeup, its brands Smashbox and Too Faced are also now worth less than what the company paid, according to its full fiscal year 2024 results. Instead, its fragrant brands Le Labo and Jo Malone drove double-digit growth in the Asia-Pacific region and the Americas, as other categories like skincare continued to decline through the company's fiscal second quarter 2025. While trying to reduce operating expenses, Este Lauder says it's increasing its advertising budget. It'll use AI to help target consumers and improve supply chains. Other changes include more growth in e-commerce, specifically Amazon and TikTok Shop, which the company adopted in part in 2024. Competitors appeared there much earlier and more strongly.
Yeah, they just mentioned entering TikTok Shop in 2024. I assume you're pretty late to that market, which is exactly what I had mentioned earlier.
Executives are also looking for growth opportunities in new markets, like Latin America and Africa, regions that are expected to have explosive growth in beauty in 2025.
So the interesting part here is that they actually are highlighting North America and Europe have grown about 8%. So that still would have presumably made a positive impact on their revenue beyond just pricing. Obviously, inflation exists, but inflation hasn't been 8% in the last year, depending on when this time frame is that they're referencing. So it still seems like they are losing market share, broadly speaking, here, which is clearly an issue.
It's going to take years, right? You've got to build the infrastructure to facilitate your ability to connect to consumers. You've got to accelerate the innovation to come up with things that the local consumers in those markets needs, and you want to proceed cautiously because you are a global brand with premium brand standing. You don't want to jeopardize that in any way.
The biggest obstacle to this new plan
is time drag. The longer this takes, the more at risk that becomes. And it's a flywheel kind of effect.
Having become the world's second largest beauty company through a fierce M&A strategy, the company could leverage that again. And though it fully acquired Canadian-based company Decium in May 2024, experts believe it needs to invest even more in that area.
So I think the pause button at Este is really making it troublesome to keep up in that regard, making it difficult and tricky. It's really hard to meet the trends without M&A. And when the headwinds take that tool out of your chest, it's tough. Then it's like, oh, now we're losing.
Este Lauder is still the number 2 premium beauty brand in the US by market share, but other companies, including LVMH, with $8.7 billion.
Wow. I wouldn't have guessed that they were that high. Obviously, I've heard of L'Oreal and LVMH, Chanel. I don't know what this third one is. Beiersdorf? I'm not sure. Maybe if you know how to pronounce it, also post that in the comments. I'll have to look that up again some other time. So they are a very serious contender here, but they're also not that far ahead of some of these other folks, whereas like L'Oreal is so huge. They're 3 times the next person, which is Estee Lauder here, but Estee Lauder is only like 50% higher than the next up, and they're still not even double LVMH. And so their lead is much smaller compared to some of these other companies, so it does seem like they have less that's making them stand out. And I would have guessed that like LVMH or Chanel are much more prestigious brands. At least that's my take from my cursory knowledge of the market.
$1 billion in beauty sales in 2024 are inching closer. The company is also lagging behind competitors in capturing Gen Z consumers. Innovation will be crucial, especially when moving beyond travel retail and the Chinese market. As of March 4th, 2025, the US and China are in a trade war, and that could further dampen demand.
It's a very big uncertainty for Estee Lauder. They can't quickly eliminate or significantly reduce their exposure to China. It is what it is.
Beauty is not fully discretionary, and the industry outperformed other consumer sectors like apparel.
I don't think that lady actually works for Estee Lauder, but she's super chill about this. She's like, it is what it is. They're not doing as bad as we would expect them to be. So it feels like she maybe is pro that company, but I'm just appreciating how nonchalant she seems to be about her takes on the company and where they're at right now.
Apparel in 2023 and 2024. While it has started to correct some of its mistakes, it's still early. This is the first quarter under new leadership, and real impact, if any, will take time.
Together, we are reimagining what's possible, leading our own transformation so that we can lead this industry once again.
You're not going to see a $300 stock price immediately. But am I cautiously optimistic? Yes. Like, I have a buy rating on the stock, so, I guess that speaks for itself.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.